Welcome to the Top Knot Squad,
a podcast for the mom, parent, or woman who doesn't exactly fit in, but loves hard anyway.
Hosted by Naya, Adriana, and Alexis.
3 friends passionate about their beliefs
and unafraid to speak their minds.
Are you ready to laugh, be vulnerable, and keep it real with us?
Top knots are not required.
On today's episode, we have a trigger warning. We will be discussing infertility and perinatal loss, which we all know is a sensitive and difficult subject. Please take the space you need and step away if needed. We will also be sharing support resources should you need them, and as always, we'll reference those in the show notes. We know 1 in 4 pregnancies end in loss, and like many of the topics we tackle, our hope is that by talking more openly about the experience, we can feel less alone on the journey. We would also like to recognize that October is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month. The loss of a child stays with a parent forever, but it can be challenging for others to truly understand the emotional and physical impact. Events across the country take place each October in order to educate and help people better empathize and support parents through their grief journey. So, a working definition for the term perinatal loss, this includes miscarriage, stillbirth, and then neonatal or infant death. This could also be expanded to include abortion or termination for medical reasons. So there's definitely lots of different types of losses, and they each kind of come with their own unique physical and emotional components. I think in general, when talking about this subject, is that everyone's journey is completely unique. So we can't really lump that into one.
Mm-hmm. So do we want to, break down personal experience with this? Because
Yeah, we can.
Okay.
You feel comfortable? You go first.
Okay, I'll go first. I'll go first. So I don't have a lot of I don't have any experience really with neonatal or infant death, but I do have experience with miscarriage. In between my 2 pregnancies, after trying for 11 cycles, I got pregnant, but then lost the pregnancy at about between 6 and 8 weeks. I don't really have a good idea of when I conceived, but judging by what my HCG levels were and things like that, it was between 6 and 8 weeks gestation. So it was far enough along where I was almost out of that first trimester, kind of period of, is it going to stick? Is it not going to stick? Is it a viable pregnancy or not? And all of that. So I was like 2/3 of the way through. It was awesome. I was really excited. This was a baby that we had tried for a long time. And then I miscarried, and it was devastating. It was hard for me to have to, explain to my husband what happened. It was hard for me not to blame myself for what happened. But looking back, maybe looking at it from a more scientific point of view, just knowing that something with the chromosomes didn't line up correctly, and for whatever reason, that pregnancy was not viable. And my body kind of did what it is supposed to do in some of those cases. I'm trying to phrase this as sensitively as possible, just because I know that not everybody agrees with the way that I sort of rationalized it or kind of talked myself through it to help myself through that process. But that really helped me kind of get past the whole, it's all my fault, because it wasn't my fault. I didn't do anything. I didn't, obviously once I got that positive, that big fat, the BFP as they call it in the TTC world, once I got that, obviously I stopped with anything I was doing. I had actually stopped drinking and all kinds of stuff before that, just in case. So I know that there was nothing I did, but it still was really hard for me. I still can't help but wonder. Then well, what if it had been the girl? Because now I have 2 boys. I'm very happy with them, but my heart is always I need a girl. I need a little me to, raise a little feminist and personify my feminist agenda too. You all right?
I'm sorry. Yes, I had to sneeze. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. But yeah, I definitely always wonder. And I ended up conceiving 2 cycles after the miscarriage. And that one, it was a very difficult pregnancy, but now I have a happy and thriving 4-year-old, and I'm grateful for him. But I can't help but wonder sometimes. So that's my experience with it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it took a lot of trust in me to tell people that it had happened, because I feel like the first question out of people's mouths when you do tell them that you were pregnant and you lost it or whatever is, well, what happened? well, I don't fucking know what happened. If I knew, I wouldn't be as devastated as I was. So
horrible.
yeah, no, I don't know what happened. Like, no, I don't even know how to answer that question sometimes. And I'm sure that it comes from a good place and they're trying to maybe help me work through it or maybe work through their own issues if it was a close friend or even a family member. But it's not helpful as somebody on the receiving end of those fairly intrusive questions. It's not your business. Yeah.
So did you share that, like, as soon as you knew, you shared the news?
I shared the news with a couple of close friends. I did not share it with my husband. So I don't think I'm going to tell this story on air, but I'll tell you guys off air. But it's kind of a fucked up story. That's why. But basically, Dave was going through a whole bunch of stressors at work and with grad school. And he's like, if anything happens, anything bad happens, don't tell me. Don't tell me until my midterms are over and blah, blah, blah. And so, of course, I didn't tell him until his midterms were over. But by then it was too late. And I was no longer pregnant. And so I had to tell him that I was pregnant and then I wasn't pregnant.
Oh, gosh.
That's the short version of the fucked up story. But of course, after I told him, he's like, well, why didn't you tell me? And I'm like, you told me not to tell you. You didn't want to be stressed out. But he feels bad about it now, too. He's like, I should have been there. I should have supported you. I should have done that. And it's like, it's fine. It's okay. Looking back now, it's fine. At the time, of course, I was really upset. But I think a lot of that had to do with just the pregnancy ending and it being so wanted and so desired and things.
Yeah.
But no, I'm definitely one of those who kind of keeps pregnancy to herself or to just a small group of people until I hit that 12 or 14 week mark. And then, you make the Facebook announcement and tell the whole world and you're excited. And all of a sudden you have this belly that wasn't there before. And you're like, oh, all the pregnancy things.
Yeah.
But the second pregnancy, or I guess technically the third pregnancy that led to my youngest, that was also a very difficult pregnancy, but I really tried to enjoy it because I knew it was going to be my last one. I tried to, enjoy every minute, but I have to say, despite all the hardships and stuff that I went through, I really did enjoy being pregnant. I liked it. I liked having that big belly. I liked not being able to get up off the couch. For a couple of reasons. One is it made me realize that there was a life in me, that I was growing and all the kicks and rumbles and heartburn and all that shit. But at the same time, I've never felt more feminine or more beautiful in my life. And it was definitely because of pregnancy. I felt like some sort of fertility goddess. I don't even know how to put it.
I'm curious, did it impact at all? Oftentimes with a loss, there's secondary losses along with that. So just the loss of being a parent and the loss of your reproductive story of this is what this was going to look like for me and this is a different path.
I definitely had a lot more of those losses with the second pregnancy because I was on bed rest for so long and I had envisioned having this beautiful birth at home and it would be relatively intervention free. And I looking back, I could have still had it because I met all the criteria and eventually I kind of risked out of obstetrical care and back with the nurse midwife practice I was with. But I didn't, at that point I was like, I don't want to have to start all over again and figure out what to do and things like that. But there was definitely a lot of loss with the way that I envisioned my birth to be, how I envisioned my pregnancy to be as well. And so I think the point of me telling all of this is that that sense of loss doesn't necessarily have to come from loss. It can come from, or the loss of a pregnancy. It can come from the loss of the pregnancy experience or what have you. And so, everything from dressing the bump to the gender, all the stuff that you see all over Instagram. I was so excited to do it one last time and document the whole thing for my blog and so on and so forth. But then after the pregnancy became high risk and I was on bed rest, it was I was scared to get too attached to the pregnancy because I still hadn't reached that point of viability. And even if I did reach it, there was no guarantee I'd make it to full term. And so there was definitely a lot of loss and a lot of emotions associated with things. Again, just like you said, the way that I envisioned it going, the way that I envisioned pregnancy and early parenthood and all of that stuff going. So there's a lot of loss there. I actually have a whole lot of baggage from that pregnancy. Even still, I work through some of it with my my therapist postpartum, but there's still shit that still comes up when I'm not expecting it to come up. So, yeah.
I think that's something that's true for loss in general, and I wrote some notes about that, about the various, just from a mental health perspective, some of the theories that therapists might pull from surrounding grief and loss. Like the older theories are more like stage theories of like you go through denial, you go through anger, you go through bargaining, and then there's always an ending of like, okay, now we accept this and move on. But the newer train of thought is that that's not helpful for grief.
No. And that's definitely, no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say that's definitely one thing that I've learned is that grief is not linear. It tends to go in phases, and you'll be doing fine for weeks at a time, and then all of a sudden something will happen, and you'll be back to stage one or one of the earlier stages or phases of grief even.
Yeah, that was rough.
I'm sorry. I know. This is a heavy episode.
It is, but I'm sure it's going to help some.
Oh, I was looking at Naya. I wasn't looking. Were you getting emotional? I'm sorry. Oh.
No.
No. No.
You're like, no.
Sorry. I know, which is a horrible reaction, but no. No, it's just a lot to process.
It is. I know that a lot of women don't share their pregnancies until they're well into that second trimester, kind of in that safe zone. But the more and more, maybe it's social media and how people are sharing pregnancies that don't always carry to term or infant demise or fetal loss or, any of those things. But I feel like that is so much more prevalent now than maybe it was even when I was pregnant with my oldest. And that was 2010. So that wasn't that long ago. But again, I don't know if it's social media, if there's some sort of environmental pollutants or whatever, some toxic stuff that we're all exposed to. But I do feel like it happens more prevalently.
Frequently. Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree.
It's still, I think culturally, it's still one of those taboo subjects that silences us, which is not healthy and sucks.
Yeah.
But I do agree that I think it has gotten better over the years. If you talk to our parents and their generation, how different that is from now about how openly we share about pain and things that are uncomfortable. But there's still work to be done there, I think.
No, I totally agree. It's crazy how much I know now in just a few years. Like Jack is going to be 5 in January, and Jack at 1 or Jack even at 2, I felt like I knew a lot, but now with the blog and knowing so many birth professionals and just the experience, right, of motherhood, you realize you know so much more. And I can't say that if this happened now, it would be I'd have a different reaction. I don't know. I'm not sure. But we did experience loss after Jack. Jack was a year old, and I found out we were pregnant. Actually, we had found out right before Christmas. So I was at 13 weeks.
Wow.
We were a little further along. It was weird, though. It was all very, I guess, because I don't think this is lucky, but I guess maybe it was what happened. So Jack, the week before I miscarried, had his first febrile seizure.
Oh my gosh. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, that was a nightmare because it was in the middle of the night. He's 105, it was a 105.8, which I was like, how are you alive?
Yeah.
Rushed him to the hospital, the whole thing. And all of us were kind of in shock from that. And I had already had a rough year with severe postpartum anxiety. I had to watch him sleep, make sure he lived, because somehow watching him, he would live that way, right?
Right.
So we just went right back to that, where I'm like, are you going to die? Because no one tells you about febrile seizures. I had never heard of them before. And, at the emergency room, everyone's like, yeah, this is completely normal. It happens to so many kids. What?
Yeah,
never heard of this.
That's not comforting.
No.
That doesn't help me while he's going through it.
Yeah, exactly. So that following weekend, it was just bad, the whole thing. And now I can recognize it's problems I have with emotions and with just dealing with emotions. And at the time, I was just this bottle of just everything was bottled up, everything. To the point where we had friends that weekend, and I just ignored it and kept on going. And I was spotting the entire weekend, not saying anything.
No.
Felt horrible. It was I still remember it was a Sunday, and I just wanted them to leave because I needed to go to the hospital.
Yeah.
And it was just crazy. It's so surreal now when I think back that I just let it go down that way. that's what I'm saying. With everything I know now, I think I would have forced myself to find support because I was so like, and I had Steven there, but I still didn't want to tell him either because, we had just finished dealing with Jack's febrile seizures. He had just turned 1. I'm pretty sure they were there for his birthday. It's just so much, right? So much. And then they left and literally like they left and I was like, let's go to the hospital. Like something's wrong.
Yeah.
And because I didn't want to tell anyone and I was so angry telling Steven not to tell anyone, that put us in the position of, well, who's going to watch Jack?
Right.
So I sent him home to watch Jack and I was like, I'm going to stay here by myself.
Oh, no.
And I know now I'm like, God. So I just dealt with it by myself and was there for 8-9 hours. And they told me what was going on. And I just like tried to process it as best I could. And I knew I wasn't going to handle it well. And I just was trying to shut everyone out and shut everything off. It was crazy. Like now I'm like, God, that was such a wreck. It was so bad. And then, I called Steven to come pick me up. And that was something completely different too, because that night, they give you I can't remember what they give you to finish off the process so that you can completely, get everything out.
All the products of conception.
Yes, exactly. And that's like going through labor all over again, at least the beginning. It felt like there was contractions and I told Steven, at night and I felt so sick. I was like, oh my God, like I'm totally having contractions. This is crazy. This
It might have been like
horrible.
Methergin, I wonder, because that's something that they give women for placental retention postpartum. Yeah, and that feels like cramping.
Yeah.
Or it's supposed to increase cramping to, yeah.
Yeah, it was crazy. So we went through that, and then I was like, okay, well, that's that. And then my parents-in-law, they're really sweet and wonderful, but they're also very religious. So they're like, we finally told them because I think we were thinking that someone was going to have to stay the night with Jack because they weren't letting me go. And it just, they're like, we should have a funeral. And I'm like, nope, we need to close that door. We're done. Like, it happened. It's over. I need to keep on going and functioning, and I just don't. We should name it. No, nope. I'm done.
No. And I understand that for some families, that's how they choose to grieve, and I respect that, but I agree with you. I don't think I would have done the same.
Yeah.
Or I would have done the same thing you did, rather. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I need to just process what's going on with Jack, what's going on with us, like what's going on with me, my body, because you're right. You go through, like, what did I do wrong?
Right.
Where, how did my body mess this up?
Right.
Which is ridiculous. But, you think that. And I'm probably going to lose followers, which I know is so stupid, but I'm like, the judgment that I'm thinking is going to befall me. But I had an abortion when I was younger. And of course, I'm thinking this is because of that. I'm being punished. Because you can't. And I know it's not, but you still think this is my punishment. And every time I was pregnant, when I was pregnant with Jack, I was like, if anything happens to him, it's my punishment. This is why, or and it's crazy how you carry that for years because it's already been 14 years ago. And it's still like, if anything happens to them, it's punishment for that.
Right.
Which it's so ridiculous, but we feel that guilt and it's so taboo, especially in Texas.
Yes.
And I'm lucky that it happened when it did because I think that now I would be in a lot of hot water and it just wouldn't, just the way things are for women and, So yeah, that's my whole bag of tricks right there. Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. For what? It's your experience.
I appreciated you sharing about the physical aspects of it. I think that often, because there's a physical component to that type of loss, as well as an emotional component, and oftentimes, like I think in general, we're not talking about it as much, but I feel like that physical aspect is talked about even less.
Yes.
Of like, what was this experience like? Yes. And especially because again, there's lots of different variations of women's experiences related to that. And some have to go back in for a DNC and it's this whole procedure. And like, I kind of think about it similarly to how like we prepare for birth, but when things like this happen that are very painful and uncomfortable, there's less preparation leading into some of those things. And maybe if we talked about it more, it would provide a little bit more comfort for women entering that process.
Yes.
Yeah, because I had no idea. And like I said, I had an abortion before, but I had taken, what is it, RU?
480.
Yeah. So I had taken that and I was 6, like I literally found out and I was like 6 weeks, and I went and had that procedure done, and it was completely different for me because it was like the heaviest period I've ever had, which was also horrible because I couldn't stand up without passing out.
Oh my gosh.
It was, yeah. Now I'm like, I probably should have called someone. I know all these, like, I should have.
Hindsight is 20/20.
I know.
Yeah.
It was, and also I was 20, and it just wasn't.
You weren't thinking.
No. And it's such a different experience from the miscarriage, which was so painful because that was just a really heavy period. It wasn't painful, but maybe it was just the difference of 6 weeks and 12 weeks. And just the way it was happening too, that, the miscarriage was my body saying, no, this isn't working out. This isn't, it's just very different.
No, I agree. And I think you're right because mine was, like I said, 6 to 8 weeks. I don't have an exact date on it. And then when it's that early on, it's really hard to gauge a date on it, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. But no, I agree with that description. It felt like a very heavy period. I knew that I wasn't supposed to use tampons. And so I was just changing. I mean, I wasn't filling a pad every hour like the warning signs of that they tell you to go into a hospital, but it was still pretty heavy. I mean, there was some cramping. It was uncomfortable, but more than anything, every time I went to go pee or change my pad or whatever, it was another reminder that, hey, guess what? Your body didn't carry this pregnancy. You're all messed up and you're all screwed up. And so, I can sympathize there.
It's not fun.
No.
I was curious for both. You spoke a little bit about with Dave, but he didn't know. But after the fact, did you feel like your partners were supportive in the emotional component of it? Do you feel like they grieved in a different way or not at the same level as you? Like, was there anything?
I know with the miscarriage, definitely Steven supported me. And I think that's why it was so much harder because I love him. So the emotions behind that were really deep and different. And he also knows how I am. So he knew that I had to shut down and close off and not talk about it or until I was ready. So he let me have that space for a while. And when I would broach the subject, I would test the waters and he would let me, and then if I shut down, he just went with the flow because he knows me, obviously, right? And I think the first time with the abortion, no, which is probably why there was an abortion because there was, no, and there was no guilt. There was guilt in that our society makes us feel like that's the worst thing you can do, and I felt like I was messing up my life and my future, and all the thoughts that are put on us as we grow up, that's all you hear, especially if you grow up in a religious community. But because I didn't love him, I just didn't. There was no attachment to the fetus. So yeah, it was very different. But with the miscarriage, it was like crushing because I loved him, right? So, right. But no, he was very supportive.
No, I agree. I think there's a huge difference with the two, especially depending on where you are in that part of your life. Like right now, I know that if Dave's vasectomy reversed itself and I got pregnant, we probably wouldn't consider abortion. We're not thinking about having another child, but if it were to happen, it happens. But if this same thing had happened maybe 10 or 15 years ago while I was still in college, and we did have a couple of scares where the condom broke or he didn't pull out, whatever, where we had to have that discussion. Like, look, if I'm pregnant, this is what's going to have to happen. But I think where you are in your life and in your relationship, and maybe even both of those things together, because they're not mutually exclusive, can really be a determinant factor in how attached you get to the pregnancy and whether it's wanted versus unplanned. Yeah.
I totally agree.
I wanted to talk a little bit about stillbirth.
Oof. Sorry. That's like, I'm sure that's every mother's worst nightmare.
You think Mike can go get us like a bottle of whiskey or something?
Right, I know, seriously.
Like our producer.
We need mommy juice for this heavy episode.
I know.
No, I just wanted to mention again, there's a large spectrum of the types of losses that women can experience in this perinatal period, or families. It can affect both partners. And so with stillbirth, I think too, similar to what we've kind of talked about with miscarriages, I think there's a lot of things that aren't talked about surrounding that. So for example, one of the resources that I listed was Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep. I don't know if y'all have heard of it.
Yes, I have.
So it's a organization that offers photography for families who are experiencing a stillbirth so that they can have those images to remember their child. And I think that, like, again, this is a painful thing to talk about. It makes people uncomfortable. And so we tend not to talk about these things, but these are things that people need to know because otherwise they don't even know that that's an option for them. Mm-hmm. Similarly, I know some hospitals have what they call them cuddle cots, where it allows you to be able to stay with your baby for longer and spend the time that you need with them. And then, Naya, you mentioned the full spectrum doula. Mm-hmm. There's also support networks available. So oftentimes you can find out that something is going on prenatally and make the choice to carry to term. And there are support networks that you can bring on through that process so that you have that extra emotional support through that process. So I just wanted to mention that. I don't know if y'all have anything to add.
Just that Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep is kind of an amazing organization, and all of the people involved with it volunteer their time. So all the photographers volunteer their time. And my friend Shanna, who I don't know might be listening. Hi, Shanna, if you are. She's studying to be a nurse. She's mom of 2, amazing photographer, but she recently started volunteering with them. And so she's, sometimes she gets the call. It's like 11 o'clock on a Sunday, and they're like, there's this family that's heading to the hospital, and their baby's not going to make it. And so can you come and take pictures and honor that family? And I also have a friend who did have an infant demise at birth. And those pictures and those memories, and she had hired a birth photographer, but they got kind of the pictures that they needed of their baby to honor him, and they mean a lot to her. So even in that moment, I feel like if the parents or the family is like, no, I don't want pictures, maybe long term, it may be something that they can look at whenever they're ready to look at it. It's not something that you have to look at right away. It can be a part of the grieving process.
Absolutely. I had talked to a friend previously, but I didn't have time to look it up. But she's in Louisiana, and she was able to work with an organization to donate her son's organs. So I had reached out to her to ask who the organization was, and she was explaining to me that it varies by state. So I had intended to look up Texas.
Texas has ones too. I have a friend who lost her son a few years ago, and she was able to donate his organs, which it's his legacy is helping keep other children alive. That's pretty amazing.
Absolutely. So that's if you know that, we should add that to the resource list for sure, because I didn't have time to look it up. But I think what all of that is speaking to is kind of what I was saying before about just kind of the theories behind grief, and how older theories that exist are those stage theories where there's an ending and you're supposed to move on. One of the newer theories that I really love is known as continuing bonds. It came about in 1996. It was a book, I think. I can't remember the author's names. But they essentially were questioning those other dominant models that had those phases and stages to them. They were suggesting that instead, healthy grief that did not resolve by detaching from the deceased, but rather in creating a new relationship. So that whole ending point of moving on is not realistic for folks that are experiencing grief. It's really important to be able to have some sort of experience where you're able to create a new relationship with that loss or that person. And so that's what that theory is rooted in, that philosophy. And I think that's really, really important. And I essentially heard you each share a piece of that when you were sharing your stories. And it seems like these resources have been coming up for that very reason. Like, we can't just move on. Like, this is something that you carry with you forever. And you have to be able to form a new relationship with that child that you've lost. So anyways, I just wanted to add that too. I personally have not experienced perinatal loss. I know I had told y'all previously, I did with Rowan's pregnancy. I think I went in at 6 weeks, and the doctor essentially told me, because of my hormone levels, that I would miscarry. So I went home and was waiting for that to happen. It's actually quite terrible when that happens, because it's like, oh, well, we're going to take this other blood work just to be sure, but you have to come back in a week. So let's just wait a week, but I think you're miscarrying. So she did explain some of the physical stuff I might experience in that time period, but the week went by, nothing happened. We went back. The numbers had increased slightly, but not like to her liking. So she was just like, I don't know what's going on. So they did another round.
Oh, gosh.
It was another week of waiting. And so then at that point, my levels had increased, and she was like, okay, I was wrong. I ended up switching. That was with the OB-GYN. And then I switched to midwife's care because I had planned on delivering at a birth center. And I went in for the 20-week scan. I actually had Rory with me, I remember, and having a toddler at a sonogram is hysterical and impossible. So he was like laying with me on the table was the only way to like keep him not from dying. And so he was laying there, and the tech, it was like the sonogram tech, she just kept rolling around and looking. And then she finally was like, okay, I'll be right back.
Oh, no.
I know, those are always...
Yeah. And so then she brought in the midwife, and the midwife similarly was rolling around. And she basically put the wand down and said, I'm not seeing anything on the sonogram. So I just want to tell you what's going on. I would like to use, she wanted to use the vaginal, transvaginal, what the hell is that called?
Ultrasound.
A transvaginal ultrasound. So anyways, that happened, and they found Rowan.
That's crazy. At 20 weeks, you couldn't find her?
I can't actually remember the right terminology. I'm going to say it wrong, but something was, my uterus was flipped a certain way.
Tilted?
Tilted. But there's another term for that. I should know this as a doula.
Oh, was it located like posterior maybe?
Yes.
Okay.
Anyways, that was what the midwife ended up saying she thought was going on and why it was so difficult for them to find her. So again, I have this in no way, I actually, something that I preach to clients all the time is that we should never compare pain, that everyone's experience is valid. But I just didn't. I wanted to be mindful that, of course, is nothing like someone experiencing a loss. But I did experience that, and it did kind of send me on an emotional roller coaster. That's my story.
That's Rowan for you.
Right.
Yeah, very stubborn.
I wanted to touch a little bit more about infertility. I know none of us have really experienced that as much. I think
I dealt with it a little bit.
Yeah.
Just because it took me, the second time around, it took me 11 cycles to get pregnant, but then the 13th cycle is the one that I was able to carry to term. And so it's called secondary infertility. And it's actually more common than we think. And I don't have a good reason as far as why it happened, but go ahead.
Oh, no, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about that because in one of the mom groups that I went to after I had Gillen, I cannot think of what it's called right now, but I'm pretty sure they still meet. It's actually Kim and...
Well, if you're going to badmouth them, then don't name
I'm not.
Just kidding.
They're a great group.
Is it the one that at the Hive?
I think, yes, they have it at the Hive too.
The South Austin...
I don't remember.
Okay,
we'll list it later. But it's really helpful if you've just had a baby. Any of those groups are, I think. And they're free. And it's always nice to have a support. Anyway, we were talking in one of those groups because, half the group, or maybe probably more than half, had really tried to get pregnant. Some of them, it took years. I know that hopefully she won't be upset that I'm mentioning this, but my sister-in-law, it took her a while to get pregnant. We talked about the guilt coming from both ends, and also anger and just resentment, a lot of different emotions because, for her and for a lot of the women there, they were upset because, why didn't they get pregnant right away? Why did it take so long? Or, and we kind of talked about when you do see that one friend that does get pregnant and you're still not pregnant, and then it's just so hurtful and crushing. And, I talked a little bit from the other side of where you almost don't want to say anything. You don't want to say you're pregnant. You don't want it because you feel guilty that you did get pregnant. All of that, just being pregnant and being a parent the emotions behind all that is crazy sometimes.
Yeah.
But it was really, a really great experience talking through all that with all those women because it gave us all the opportunity to to really just open up about the emotions on both sides, and for me, both pregnancies were really rough, and I remember thinking, we got pregnant really quickly both times, but the pregnancy itself was so hard, which I never understood, right? Because it's like, I got pregnant so easily, it should be a healthy pregnancy. And
it should be easy.
Right, exactly. And then both times they were horrible. I had really crazy gestational diabetes and just horrible, just not fun pregnancies. And then the births as well were really rough to handle in labor. Anyway, so of course you think, that's kind of the exchange. Like, I got pregnant quickly, but I have to have this horrible, awful pregnancy. I don't know. It was just a lot to go through and to process and but it was really great being able to share that with them. And so I know that we probably have listeners that have, been or dealt with infertility. And I think if you can find a group or support, to talk to, and it's really good. And we can't really say, I think, except for Naya, but none of us have dealt with years of infertility.
Yeah, it hasn't been years. It was a little over a year. But I do have a close friend who listens. So hi, I'm not going to say her name because our other friends listen too.
Yeah.
And I don't think she wants everyone all up in her business. But I do know that she's having a little bit of trouble conceiving her second. Her first was conceived through IVF, and they're going that route again. But there are several cycles into IVF, and she's just not able to maintain the pregnancy for whatever reason. And she's starting to feel really upset. And again, same thing in kind of our group of mommy friends, we have several people who are on, it's like you blink at them and they get pregnant. They're having a lot of babies, which is fantastic. That's great for them. But as somebody who is not only having difficulty conceiving naturally, but having difficulty conceiving with reproductive assistance, I mean, that must kind of feel like salt in the wound every single time you see another pregnancy announcement, or you're invited to another baby shower, or whatever. And so I definitely try to be somebody who listens and just listens and validates and all of that for her, because I know a little bit about the struggle, but obviously not to the extent that she's going through. And I think that even if she's in, if she finds her support group with other women who are having fertility issues, there's something about talking to a good friend who's, somewhat cognizant of what goes into fertility and birth and all of that stuff, and just hearing from them and just validating their concerns. So, if you're listening and you're having some fertility issues, or you're not sure if your group of friends are the right people, then look outside of that. And it's okay. Your friends are your friends, and they love you and they support you, but they may not necessarily understand your experiences.
Exactly, yeah. And I totally agree with that. And I think that's where it gets difficult and dicey sometimes, when you do have a friend that's experiencing that, and maybe they do cut you off, or they just don't want to, be
around
anymore. Yeah. And you I feel like, yes, it may be hurtful, right? But you've got to realize that it's like not about you.
It's not. I was just going to say it's an act of self-preservation. Exactly. It's what she has to do in order to deal with the hardships that she's going through at that moment. It's not personal. It is not about you. She would probably feel that way about, a woman at the grocery store with like a bunch of kids and also pregnant.
Exactly.
Like, why is she pregnant? Why not me? Yeah.
I totally agree.
Yeah, I'm sure y'all saw I had Brene Brown on the notes, which relates to what you're saying, in that she talks a lot about the difference between empathy and sympathy. I don't know if y'all have seen the video.
I have. I love it. It's one of my favorite ones.
Yeah. Have you seen it, Adriana? Yeah. For those of you listening that haven't, it's essentially a good way to describe empathy is if you imagine that there's like a physical hole in the ground and your friend is down there. Sympathy would be just like looking in the hole and saying like, whew, I see you down there. That looks rough. But empathy is a step further, where you actually go down in the hole with them and you hold space with them and literally just listen and validate. I love what she says about, rarely does an empathic response include the term at least. And so I think, of course, people have good intentions when they're saying things like that. They're not trying to be hurtful. They're just idiots.
They think they're being helpful.
But it's important to think about that, because that's not a validating response. And, sometimes the best thing to say is, I don't know what to say.
But I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that you felt safe enough to share with me, and I'm here to hold space with you.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
I've been interrupting you guys.
You're fine. Go.
No, I was going to say that kind of applies to birth trauma as well. And for these women who imagine having beautiful home births and end up with a cesarean at the hospital because of whatever reason, for them to hear, well, at least you and the baby are safe.
Healthy, yeah.
Or healthy, yeah.
Yes. I was going to say that.
Yes, but there's so much to be said about the whole experience behind it. And the loss, again, that goes with the birth experience she thought she'd have and what she ended up with.
Yeah, the term healthy mom, healthy baby, while true, completely invalidates any emotional experience.
You said that much nicer than I would. I was going to say it makes me cringe.
Yeah, of course, it's important to have a healthy mom and a healthy baby, but birth is more than a physical process, and it's quite a tremendous emotional roller coaster. And oftentimes, if a woman has a positive outcome related to her birth, it's oftentimes more connected to how she was made to feel in that experience than how it actually unfolded. So anyways, random soapbox.
No, you're totally right. And then just to talk a little bit more about infertility and stillbirth and losing pregnancies and things like that, that all can have an effect on lactation. So if moms end up having a stillbirth, well, their body doesn't quite get the memo that there's no baby to feed, and they'll still continue to produce milk. And in our show notes, and I'll send you a link to this, but I know that Mother's Milk Bank at Austin does offer a bereaved moms program. So if there is a mom listening who did not, she had a stillbirth or what have you, she's able to take her milk and donate her milk to the milk bank. She does have to go through testing, but they should be I believe they lift the minimum amount of milk that she needs to provide. So instead of being 100-ounce minimum, if all she can manage to do is give a couple of bags because that's all she can emotionally handle, then so be it. That's fine. But I know that the milk bank I worked at in Fort Worth, they also had a similar program in place, but they actually had a beautiful memorial for all of these babies that may not have come earthside necessarily, but they were still able to have this legacy of being able to save other babies' lives. And I think it kind of goes hand in hand with the organ donation that we were talking about earlier. But even infertility can impact milk supply because sometimes it's hormonal and things aren't working quite the way that it should. And so oftentimes when I'm looking through a client's paperwork and I see that they used IVF or had some sort of assisted reproductive technology to help, I tend to probe that a little bit further. And I don't do it to make the mom uncomfortable or to make her feel inferior or anything. And I try to explain that too. But just to get an idea of, okay, well, could it somehow be related to the lactation issue that we're facing today? So it's all a continuum, and I think it's all related as well. So that's all I wanted to add to it.
I'd like to talk about some of these other resources I listed.
Yes, please.
We didn't talk a ton about NICU families, which can also experience grief and loss trauma type symptoms that are
absolutely
similar to other types of losses. Did you have a kid in NICU?
No.
Oh, okay. I don't know why I thought. Did you? You did. Okay. I thought one of y'all did.
It was Kaylin.
Do you want to speak to that experience at all?
Yeah. Like I said, we had a really weird, just unsettling labor. The doctor, the OB-GYN was great. The nurses were amazing. But something at the end just wasn't well. And then his bilirubin was just really crazy. Yeah. So what was really rough about that is that we got to go home. So we were there for 5 days or something like that. And we got to go home, and we went to the pediatrician, and this was already the whole labor had been induced really early, and not really early, at 37 weeks, and it was really went to the doctor for a checkup, and they're like, you need to go induce tonight,
right?
Which is obviously really sobering and horrible. It's just not a good feeling. Anyway, and he took several days to finally to come out. But yeah, we went to the pediatrician that next day because they said, you know, they weren't completely comfortable with his count. They wanted us to go to the pediatrician the next day. We did that, and they said, you need to take him to Dell. To Dell's children.
My gosh.
I know, which is horrible. It was just, the whole thing was a horrible feeling. And again, same or similar situation as our miscarriage, where we were kind of like, who's going to take Jack? Because my family had just been, like, between my family and Stephen's family, they had juggled Jack that week we were gone in the hospital, because I really had hope that we were in the hospital with Jack for 7 days. So I thought it's not going to be that long with Galen. So it wasn't. It was almost 6. That's fine. So we had to find a way to juggle, you know, poor Jack, who had never slept away from us too. So there was just so much gross emotion behind that too, because I was like, my baby. But yeah, so I told Stephen, I was like, just stay with Jack, I guess, because I don't know. Like, we can't call another family member to come, you know, step in right now. When, like, everyone has work the next day. It was last minute. So I toted tiny Galen to Dell, and it was so lonely. It was crazy. Like, that I'm more easily talk about, because it was just so, and my hormones were crazy. And I, like, barely made it up to the stupid room, and I just broke down. And they put him in the little, you know, the incubator.
Isolate thing.
Yeah. And then they put the little, like, thing over their eyes. Yeah. I was like, oh my God, I can't handle this. It was so much to
It's hard, and you can't pick them up if they cry, and they have to spend so many hours under there. It's hard.
Yes, it was horrible. And then, of course, I'm trying to, my milk hadn't completely come in, and they're like, just keep feeding him milk, you know, just keep pumping. And I couldn't pump anything. And a friend had given me milk, and I was super sleep deprived, right? Because this is already, at this point, this is the 8th day of maybe 2 hours of sleep a night, if that. And
you're at a hospital.
And I'm back in the hospital, yes, which I was just like, ugh, why are we here again? Now I'm trying to defrost the milk and put it in the sink, and somehow it leaked, and it was just, it all spilled in the sink, and I was just crushed. I was like, I can't do this, just give me formula. Like, and of course there's guilt with that. Oh, it was just, it was bad. But yeah, he was only there for 2 days, but for whatever reason, it was too much for me, which of course, again, more guilt, because you're thinking there's families that are there for weeks. You know, a close friend, her baby came at 30 weeks, and they were there for weeks, and I couldn't compare that. But at the same time, it was just so devastating for me to have to go back and to, you know, it's like, well, what's wrong? What did I do in the pregnancy that he can't regulate himself? You know, his sugar was super low. It was just crazy. And I just,
Were there any supports in the hospital that, like, came to check on you? Do you remember?
There was a nurse that, I mean, just his nurse that was, when I broke down crying, because I was trying so hard not to, she was like, well, you know, she's the one that was like, it's probably all your hormones. And I was like, yeah, probably. But no, there really wasn't anyone. I probably could have asked maybe, but there.
No, I didn't mean that you should have. I was just wondering if anyone came to you. Like, I don't think any parent in that space would think to ask that.
Yeah.
But I'm just I was just curious. I have a good friend that's a NICU nurse. And some of the stories she tells me, it sounds like, depending on the hospital and the NICU staff, I guess, there's different things that they'll offer as supports. Like, they'll give you a separate room where you're not, like, sleeping in a chair.
Right.
Yeah, well, we had our own room. They gave him a private room, which for whatever reason made it heavier somehow. I know that sounds crazy, but I guess when it's all the little NICU babies together or closer, it's just, I don't know, maybe more comforting because you can see other moms. And so that was crazy because it was a really big room and we're all by ourselves, and I had, like, the bed, but I wasn't going to be sleeping because you know, I'm there watching this tiny, I mean, he was, at that point, he was 5 pounds, 9 ounces.
Oh, wow.
And he was just, ugh.
So that made you feel more isolated.
Yeah.
No, and that makes sense. I mean, humans crave connection. And when you're going through something that's a time of difficulty, you want to connect with other people, not be put away in the room.
Exactly, yeah.
And, you know, that's no fault of Dell's. I get that they have their policies and germs and things like that, but I completely understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, but We made it. He's adorable now and super fat.
Well, there is an organization specifically for NICU families, Hand to Hold. Have you
Yes,
heard
I've
of
heard of them.
They actually have a podcast, which I'm assuming would be super helpful for NICU families with various topics. I think they have families come on and share their stories. But outside of that, they also, I think their main goal is connecting NICU parents with each other. So I think they have groups and they do social events.
They have like a NICU reunion, I think, once a year for all the graduates. And it's, they get to catch up with maybe neonatologists or some of the nurses and things like that.
I know they also have like a mentor program
Yes.
where you can like sign up to be a peer mentor. And I would assume that would be like kind of what I was asking you is there you have like a shift where you're at the hospital. And so if a new family comes in, you can extend a hand and offer more support. I found out about them. I went to their annual fundraiser last year. They were lovely. So there's also the Austin Center for Grief and Loss. They do have a pregnancy loss support group. Well, they have an early pregnancy loss support group, and then they have a late pregnancy or infant loss support group. They also have general loss resources, but they do have specific support groups for perinatal loss. Ronald McDonald House, they have a bereavement group. It's a 6-week program, so I think once they have people sign up, then they run different, what would the word be for that?
Meetings?
I was going to say section.
Cohort?
I get that's not what.
No.
Section is not the right word. Cohort. I don't know what I'm trying to say. But basically, they hold them throughout the year. So you're with the
series.
same group. Series. Thank you. So they hold multiple series throughout the year. And then also Austin Doula Care. Are y'all okay with me plugging them? I call them my doula mentors. It's Chelsea and Kim, and they're both more seasoned doulas. So I really value their wisdom. But they both, Kim is a lost mom, and then I know Chelsea has still birthday training, which is another resource as well. They can connect you with a doula that's trained to support bereaved families. But if you are looking for doula support, so one, they can offer you doula support, and they're trained to do that. And then Kim has had that personal experience. So for some people, they're going to receive, I know that I personally would feel comfortable taking on a lost family as a doula, but I usually up front say, I don't have this personal experience, and I know that for some people, they need to have support from someone who knows what that experience is like. So you can receive that through Austin Doula Care. And then they also have a healing group that meets 3 times a year.
Well, thank you for listening if you made it through this heavy podcast. And we will see you next time, or you'll hear us next time. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to Top Knot Squad. If you like what you hear, then be sure to click the subscribe button in your podcast app. And while you're there, leave us a review. Want to internet stalk us? Find us on Facebook or Instagram at Top Knot Squad and interact with us. We love making new friends.